Man is the measure of all things, went the thesis of Protagoras of Abdera, the first philosopher who, according to Plato, called himself a sophist. In his work on the gods, Protagoras engages in an early form of agnosticism, expressing his inability to say whether or not the gods actually exist. A certain story relates to his visit to Athens, where the Athenians wanted him dead on account of his views about the gods. In his flight from the Athenians, however, Protagoras dies in a shipwreck, providing later writers with a basis for claiming the philosopher ironically met the justice of Poseidon, no matter what he believed about the gods. This story from the 5th century BC is a choice anecdote for the philosophical mood swings the Greeks were having about the gods at this time. Zeus and his many unbelievable, beastly, and sexual encounters with mortals, and the escapist complex that led him ever to evade his wife Hera, were increasingly matters to be dealt with. There was backlash for how the poets portrayed the gods, and a clear need for more internal, symbolic, metaphorical explanations. As we perceive the rising demand for a more sophisticated Greek theology, we find our supply among the Orphics, Pythagoreans, Platonists, and especially those philosophers who engaged with mystery cults and the initiation rituals that professed to convey a certain secret knowledge of the gods and a personal experience with which to solidify it. Whether Greek, Egyptian, or Hindu, the varying perceptions about the gods of these peoples may have changed so much by the time they were first inherited that we will never perfectly know the gods' original essence. Are these powerful non-human beings with personalities who once engaged with various civilizations? Are they, as Euhemerus proposed, heroic humans, kings and queens, who once lived such extraordinary lives that they were later deified, and in some cases confounded with the God of the universe, like Jesus had come to be? Are the gods archetypal psychological traits that are unconsciously acted out by collective humanity? Or are they mere symbolic projections of aspects of human consciousness onto natural and phenomenal processes and events in nature? If the most successful and well-known philosophic Greeks, for instance, struggled to define and categorize their native gods, we should not expect the average modern layman to have a snowflake's chance in Dante's Inferno of knowing the true breadth or origin of them. God in Greek is theos, which could refer to singular or plural gods or theoi. The Kemetic or ancient Egyptian term for gods appears to be netcher, which upon a brief examination shows that the term is not exchangeable with gods in how we use the term today. This Egyptian term can also include spirits, who usually occupy a lower place in the divine hierarchy, such as that of daemons and angelic entities. Self-proclaimed atheists and agnostics often cite the silliest, non-biblical evangelical Christian dogmas as reasons they cannot believe in God or the gods, as if evangelical Christians could provide an accurate lens through which to observe God, our understandably general title for the unified and most encompassing intelligence of the universe. To say nothing of their capacity to define gods, which the dogmatists reduce to evil demons or outright dismiss in a reminiscence of the rhetorical siege engines produced by the early church father apologists. Those who too easily throw scorn on the pagan gods and use pagan as a pejorative are signing out of this discussion, unconsciously admitting their ignorance on the subject. Such lay thinkers will never become trusted authorities on what the gods are and what they mean. While it is a shame so many fundamental Christian adherents engage in this dismissive behavior, it is pathetically ironic when you consider that the God-filled, Greek-speaking world is much of what Christianity was born from. Greek-speaking, like the estimated 1 million Jews living in Hellenized Alexandria in the 1st century, some of whom were taught by Philo of Alexandria, a notoriously Platonic philosopher. Equal caution should be levied against those who over-unify what are clearly separate deities. To say the Greek god Hermes is the Egyptian Thoth, for instance, is not a statement one makes without disclaimers and contextualization. This goes as well for thinking Osiris is Dionysus or Athena is Isis. Even when we equate Greek gods to the Roman gods, who clearly adopted them, we still find cultural and categorical differences between each syncretized Greco-Roman deity. Therefore, to hone in on our mystery and avoid generalizations, we must wrestle with the meanings of God and the many lesser divinities in ancient theologies and modern religions before we presume any understanding. Though the categorical names of these beings might be gods or angels respectively, the functions of divinity through deputized, plural beings is a universal theme. A divine hierarchy at some level exists in the Egyptian, Greek, Hebrew, Indian, and every other theological tradition. The definition of God in the modern world is subject to a set of predominant viewpoints, rarely disentangled from the tropes and thematic confinements of popular religion. Even today, there are allegedly well-informed people who pass off God as some sort of wise and enlarged humanoid hovering above the world, as if God was nothing more sophisticated in concept than a bearded sage supervising the atmosphere. But this is a strictly modern misinterpretation, which falls apart upon the briefest critique. Some fixate on the judgment of a cruel God reminiscent of sections in the Old Testament, as if pointing out the barbarities of the ancient world should somehow overshadow what we allow ourselves to believe about God today. Many absurdities have polluted God's definition or crowded it out with creations that are exterior to any archaeological or literary source and are a product of throwing out the historical baby while keeping the bathwater of dogmatism. When researchers address the origins of monotheism, some associate it with the insights of Moses or the solar religion of the pharaoh Akhenaten. This, too, is a failing, and in the case of Moses, it appears to be a retroactive cleanup performed by Abrahamic exclusivists who would have us believe the various gods of the Bible are actually one coherently singular God throughout. However, monotheism is not an ancient category, and to project it too strongly onto the Israelites or any religious bundle of scriptures distracts from the mystery of what ancient peoples believed their gods to be. To claim that the god Yahweh or Adonai, often championed as the world's first instance of monotheism, is somehow the singular God as Christians view God today, is to ignore the data. The first time Yahweh enters history on the Mesha stele is in testimony of his defeat by another deity, Chemosh of the Moabites. And certainly if Yahweh was meant to exist alone, you would not find him with a consort, Asherah, and you would not get the highly debated passages such as Deuteronomy 32:8-9, where a clear distinction is made between the El Elyon, God the Most High, and the Lord God Yahweh. Obviously, the perceived definition of the highest spiritual being varies for every civilization and every individual who defines it. These variations can range from a personal deity directly involved with the individual's life to a deity that is beyond all capacity to understand, one that encompasses and permeates all things but takes no active role in the material world, because such an active role would be beneath it. Between these extremes, we have heard every variety of definitions and suppositions about God, setting us up for confusion. We may then find ourselves repeating distillations from church and scripture, adapted for easy digestion. To navigate this fog, we should ask caution to hover over our shoulders like the daemon of Socrates when we address any religious belief system. If we aren't exposed to the views of philosophers and thought leaders throughout history who were directly involved in the refinement of the theological ideas inherited by the modern world, we can't benefit from what problems they believe to have sorted out once and for all. And some of us risk defining God and the gods in a manner that is actually thousands of years out of date. Considering the impossibility of summarizing the one being responsible for all that is, and knowing that nature offers a wide spectrum of powerful forces, it is not inherently foolish to perpetuate the visible and invisible worlds with a troop of divine beings. The sun and the moon, the water and the earth, the pleasant and grotesque, there are countless distinctions to be drawn in the world, urging us to think of the existence of numerous deities, each allotted a realm of control and influence, much like there are multiple examples of everything else, plants and animals, languages, and types of human beings. These deities, believed to live within the fabric of nature and ourselves, are always disseminated into a hierarchy, each to their place, presiding over the power that is suited to them. Relying too strongly on the typologies of polytheism, pantheism, monotheism, and the like sets us up for mistakes. Monotheism as a term wasn't used until the 1660s, when it was coined by the British philosopher Henry Moore, and its initial definitions, given in the 1700s, do not equate to its current definition. Regardless of the term's fallibility, monotheisms, as we know them, never existed without some degree of angels, demons, and subservient or independent spirits. Where do polytheisms or pantheisms exist without their supreme primordial deity somewhere at the origin of things? In fact, the more one pushes out the one God into a state of exalted isolation, the more one finds the need to proliferate the in-between realms with God's divine agents. Thus, given the current volume of modern categories and the general contradictions between mythology and personal spiritual beliefs, it helps to refine our perspective about the gods as they were understood by the same minds who lived in their primacy. Without this, why should we ever speak about the gods and think we know anything? Hierocles of Alexandria, a Neoplatonist flourishing in the 5th century, tells us much about the divine hierarchy in the golden verses of Pythagoras. Quote, "Now God, being all good by nature, produced the first beings that most resemble himself, secondly, those of a middle likeness to himself, and thirdly, those who of all the beings that resembled him participate the least in his divine image." Another Pythagorean quote, quite friendly to this discussion, comes from the philosopher Sextus. God, however, is not a name to God, but an indication of what we conceive of him. We are also reminded by a quote attributed to the Pythagorean Zeleusis from the 7th century BC, how the idea of a harmonious government for the Greeks implied a virtuous relationship between the people and the gods that ruled their lands. Regardless of the religious differences between the Greeks, the gods still needed to be honored. No matter what the philosophers did to develop new interpretations of them, the gods should be known to exist on account of the observation of the natural world. Zeleusis says all inhabitants of city or country should in the first place be firmly persuaded of the existence of divinities as a result of their observations of the heavens and the world, and the orderly arrangement of the beings therein. With the 6th century Pythagorean Charondas, we get the sense that honoring the gods was a courtesy to be extended to foreigners as well. Indeed, the fact that you had your gods and they had theirs did not mean you were right and they were wrong. Both pantheons were equally real. In fact, the same gods may have already been commonly known to all nations despite their differences in name. Quote, "Let every stranger who was venerated in his own country conformably to the proper laws of that country, be received or dismissed with auspicious cordiality, calling to mind the hospitable Zeus as a god who is established by all nations in common." Prior to the 2nd millennium BC, and really any time afterward, we are hard-pressed to find instances of a singular god without an accompanying hierarchy of deities and subsidiary angelic entities. In ancient Egypt, we confront cosmologies that indicate a henotheism or a monotheistic setup cloaked in a polytheistic distribution. From the one comes the many, and from the many is the one better known and understood in its variety of incarnations. Born out of the ineffable first God arrives the preceding deities who serve like functionaries across the spectrum. There is great wisdom to the idea that the one God cannot be defined without being defiled. Many mystics and philosophers have elevated God beyond the capacity to be limited by any mode of language, which is part of the reason strict monotheisms always run into the issue of over-personifying God and humanizing a deity, even to the point of buying into the idea that this one God could actually manifest into a single begotten Son. Certainly, all definitions fall short of conveying an all-encompassing principle. The one is everywhere at once, faceless, and yet smiling behind each of the 1,000 faces humankind has given it. If God already moves in all things, then why can't all the unique facets of nature be worshipped according to their peculiar roles? Humanity is naturally unsatisfied with stagnant ideas. Such cravings for novelty don't merely surrender when it comes to mythological procedures. To point out one situation, a passage on the god Heracles, given by Herodotus in the 5th century BC, demonstrates the changeable nature of a god and how, at times, humans either took the name of a deity or a human was later deified for any myriad of reasons. Herodotus says, "So then my inquiries show clearly that Heracles is an ancient god, and those of the Hellenes seem to me to act most rightly who have 2 temples of Heracles set up, who sacrifice to the one as an immortal god, and with the title Olympian, and make offerings to the dead to the other as a hero." Much like life itself, gods and their definitions are subject to an eternal flux, and are difficult to perceive in their first forms when they were first introduced to a culture. Nonetheless, history seems to pull the gods down from their Olympian heights and tell us they can be born inside the world. Jesus is often portrayed as not only the Lord and Savior, but also in his Trinitarian capacity as co-equal, but not exactly co-equal, with God the Father. Christians who are still impelled to believe Jesus was the one God incarnate in a historical man seem to have trusted the English translations too much, or fallen short of one too many histories where many other so-called prophets and philosophers were equated with a deity. Pythagoras was considered to be the son of Apollo by name, the same as Orpheus the Thracian. Alexander the Great was once the son of Zeus Ammon. Apollonius of Tyana was attributed with many of the same miracles as the Christian prophet, and later given fictitious divine parentage. But no pagan philosophers reminiscent of the Neoplatonists, Pythagoreans, and Stoics would have been so bold as to claim a man was the literal one God descended in material form. That is not to say that some civilizations like the Egyptians did not worship human beings or their pharaohs, but that it is a stretch to equate a mortal man with the one principle of all nature, and it always has been. Now, gods were distinct in every culture in terms of how they were worshipped, and the modes of worship often varied depending on the social class the worshipper came from. Again, we should avoid falling under the assumption that the priestly, literate, initiated, or philosophic classes would have studied the gods in the same manner as the common populace, a warning equally relevant to the present day. Gods were bargained with to an extent, as the sacrifices of animals and plants at the temples indicate. Yet if a god is incorporeal and disembodied, how could trade be made with something physical? We find the prevalent perspective of gods as embodied beings not registering well for a mind like Iamblichus, living around 242 to 325 AD. Iamblichus, the Syrian Neoplatonist, tells us the celestial divinities are not comprehended by bodies, but contain bodies in their divine lives and energies, that they are not themselves converted to body, but they have a body which is converted to its divine cause, and that body does not impede their intellectual and incorporeal perfection, nor occasion them any molestation by its intervention. Iamblichus confirms that we have attributed the gods with our own base characteristics. He treats their symbols and images as, at most, a rude form of their true energies, and asserts that the genuine nature of the gods was, for the most part, unavailable. But to the initiated, or those who have attended the rituals of the mystery cults and undergone the rites of passage that would convey the true understanding of the gods, their symbols served as meditative objects whose purpose had to be earned before it was known. This, therefore, says Iamblichus, is nearly the cause of our aberration to a multitude of conceptions. For men being in reality unable to apprehend the reasons of sacred institutions, but conceiving that they are able, are wholly hurried away by their own human passions, and form a conjecture of divine concerns from things pertaining to themselves. We are referred once again to Plutarch, the Greek philosopher-historian, who says, "When therefore thou hearest the myth-sayings of the Egyptians concerning the gods, wanderings and dismemberings and many such passions, thou should remember what has been said above, and think none of these things spoken as they really are in state and action." What does the worship of a particular deity entail? Prior to a battle, we could imagine that appeasing the god of war would be a practical step in the right direction. If the very energy that infuses warfare can possess the warrior in the midst of combat, what does that actually mean? Do we imagine a human-like figure dwelling in another dimension that sends invisible energy to saturate the summoner? Or more appropriately, do we conceive that locked inside each of us are behaviors and states of being we can embody to meet the tests of life? Anyone who has paid time and suffering with a team of athletes who have said the Lord's Prayer before a competition will know that there is an energy and a bond that comes over the team in these moments, which can lend confidence and dispel anxieties. In this way, the Greek author of the Homeric hymn to Ares, the Greek god of war, educates us on the functionality of this deity and asks for the strength not to destroy the enemies on the battlefield, but the enemies within. In the hymn to Ares, we read, "Shed down a kindly ray from above upon my life, and strength of war, that I may be able to drive away bitter cowardice from my head and crush down the deceitful impulses of my soul. Restrain also the keen fury of my heart, which provokes me to tread the ways of blood-curdling strife. Rather, O Blessed One, give you me boldness to abide within the harmless laws of peace, avoiding strife and hatred and the violent fiends of death." A writer and orator in the ancient Greek world might worship Hermes on account of the god's mastery over language and interpretation. And we would be careful with our words if we were a Phoenician trader approaching the border of a Greek state, where there were often herms or stone heaps erected in Hermes' name. As Hermes became also the god of trade and commerce, language reminiscent of the god's skill could be employed to reach the intended bargain. Conceiving Hermes in this way makes the stories about his many tricks, deceits, and amusing trades come to life beyond the tale in the Homeric hymns and other sources. And how else could we relate to a god without them being personified in a narrative and emotional structure? Moreover, the state of being that accompanies a warrior is not the same that indulges in casual oration or creative writing. But it isn't as if one god dies when we activate the other. All the gods are already enmeshed in the forms of our world and its sentient life. It is the thematic model of a human's intelligence and behavior that draws them out of us, which has gradually provided human stereotypes to these alleged divinities for the utility of oral tradition. If we are born into a skill set, we would not be wise to forsake the god that has an influence over it. Instead, we would rather activate the god inside ourselves most suited to bring out the traits resembling it. In that way, we synchronize with the right gods and find new relationships in reading their respective stories. This is the difference between internalization and externalization. This kind of understanding becomes more relevant when we unpack the fact that even under alleged monotheisms, some angels and demons can be summoned for their intrinsic power, or they can be dispelled. It would be strange to think that we could invite the ultimate power of the one God to possess us or guide us when that God is already inseparably active within us. Indeed, it is the only thing that can be activated, and yet at the same time it is situated at the centermost, untraceable, and eternal region of existence. There is therefore some anthropocentrism to the idea that an individual is so important that the one God should stoop to intervene in their personal life. Following this logic, some ancient traditions have found it quite reasonable to present a subsidiary region of deities and spirits more readily available to the whims of mortals. We're not claiming that all civilizations thought of their gods in this light, only that there is a nuance here that is not often considered, and easily passed over by those who hold antiquity in superstitious contempt, and fail to review the writings of those who actually fleshed out the divine hierarchies. But what's more intriguing are the similarities of pantheons across continentally large spans of Earth. The gods seem only to have changed in detail rather than in theme. In this way, the same gods exist for humans everywhere, as much as the same emotions and psychological pitfalls exist within the lives of the same humans. At the very least, reducing the gods to their literal portrayal in myths falls short of capturing their completed image. So we ask whether or not the better minds of pagan civilizations had a more nuanced perspective about their deities beyond the classic examples used to demonize them, like human and animal sacrifice. Where one worshipper can engage in the most profane means to assuage a god, another philosopher might engage the same god by wholly other means. In the Greek tradition, Hesiod's Theogony offers the genealogy of the gods and the general tales of their upbringing and position in the divine hierarchy. As in Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, the gods are conveyed much like humans, who are immortal and far more powerful, dwelling in the higher regions of Mount Olympus, yet capable of appearing before mankind in the flesh or disguised as animals or other human beings. The gods feel desire and also make terrible mistakes, as if they are exaggerated thematic elements of human life, portrayed in an epic saga, tied in part to historical events. Many gods don magical armor or wield magical devices that go hand in hand with their sphere of influence. As Hesiod puts it in his Works and Days, "For the gods keep hidden from men the means of life. Else you would easily do work enough in a day to supply you for a full year even without working. Soon would you put away your rudder over the smoke, and the fields worked by ox and sturdy mule would run to waste. But Zeus in the anger of his heart hid it, because Prometheus the crafty deceived him. Therefore he planned sorrow and mischief against men. He hid fire, but that noble son of Iapetus stole again for men from Zeus, the counselor, in a hollow fennel stalk, so that Zeus, who delights in thunder, did not see it." Although depictions of gods in the Hesiodic and Homeric poems make for timeless tales and allow for oral traditions to build up the morals of their followers, when it came to the philosopher's turn to assess the veracity of the myths and the utility of the gods, a whole new dimension of meaning had to be uncovered, lest the stories get thrown aside wholeheartedly. Just like the gods occupied different levels of intelligence, so too did the humans that worshipped them. Certainly, as Plato alludes to in his Tale of Atlantis and Homer in the Trojan War, there was an immediate connection between the Greek gods and historical events. However, the fictional elements of the gods and some of their more loathsome, licentious activities were scrutinized, leaving behind a format of symbolic understanding. To see the gods as internal psychological forces, and to see their stories as meaningful symbolic narratives woven for their esoteric value became more reasonable than any literal approach. Iamblichus, for one, compares the stories about the gods to the tales of old women, denying that the common populace has been given the tools to understand their true meaning. He pulls no punches in claiming that secret schools like that of the Pythagoreans obtained the keys to an inner understanding. Plato also doesn't see much value in the literal interpretations of myths beyond the symbolic attributes they were originally meant to convey, the historical events they tease at, or the cosmic objects they were bound to. To Plato, as evinced in his Phaedrus, the gods were intelligences that transcended the need for ascertaining truth or objective reality, because they were wholly alive inside the true and ultimate cosmos, dwelling in a region mankind may only travel to once the mortal shell is shed at death. And much as the Roman statesman and philosopher Cicero understood, the secret knowledge learned in the mysteries gave the initiate a better hope about death. To achieve harmony with these divine forces, employing reason and general morality in every aspect of life, became to the intellectual class a more agreeable approach to obtaining the gods' favor. Let's take Plato's Phaedrus as it appears in the Complete Works edition edited by John M. Cooper. We find a section coming after a long dialogue where the soul's nature is touched on, with the fall of the soul into a mortal illusion. Here we can gain an understanding of Plato's divine hierarchy in this reading, where the symbolic components of chariots and wings are utilized to make it, we might say, easier to visualize. Now Zeus, the great commander in heaven, drives his winged chariot first in the procession, looking after everything and putting all things in order. Following him is an army of gods and spirits arranged in 11 sections. Hestia is the only one who remains at the home of the gods. All the rest of the 12 are lined up in formation, each god in command of the unit to which he is assigned. Now a god's mind is nourished by intelligence and pure knowledge, as is the mind of any soul that is concerned to take in what is appropriate to it, and so it delighted at last to be seeing what is real and watching what is true, feeding on all this and feeling wonderful until the circular motion brings it around to where it started. And passing by the life of the gods, we learn about the grades of souls, who come next in the classes of beings. Quote, "As for the souls, one that follows a god most closely, making itself most like a god, raises the head of its own charioteer up to the place outside and is carried around in the circular motion with the others. Although distracted by the horses, this soul does have a view of reality, just barely. Another soul rises at one time and falls at another, and because the horses pull it violently and in different directions, it sees some real things and misses others. The remaining souls are all eagerly strained to keep up, but are unable to rise. They are carried around below the surface, trampling and striking one another as each tries to get ahead of the others. The result is terribly noisy, very sweaty and disorderly. Many souls are crippled by the incompetence of the drivers, and many wings break much of their plumage. After so much trouble, they all leave without having seen reality, uninitiated, and when they have gone, they will depend on what they think is nourishment, their own opinions." This belief in a collection of divine powers, superior by nature and existing in a hierarchy, was practically a truism in ancient civilization. The idea that beings were active in the processes of nature and reflected through their personalities survived for thousands of years among the Egyptians, which is a long time to try and explain the inscrutable. By the appeasement of these divine personalities, one could determine good and evil, and the soul could speak easily before its judgment. The belief in immortality wasn't so much in question as was the quality of it, and who but the gods to align with to achieve blissful eternity. Moving behind the demiurgic world, ancient man personified, allegorized, and symbolized what we have come to reduce to gods. Gods that have lived on through history to provide our religious narratives and still reside in our subconscious in the form of religious imagery. Seeing deities beneath our psychology and out in the world served a variety of functions, but we don't have a clear point of origin for any pantheon. Rather, they come fully formed out of the abyss, their true births lost in the veil of prehistory. Out of the glories and ruinations of time, the great peoples of Egypt, Crete, and Persia emerge with intimate spiritual traditions woven into their holidays, rituals, and burials. The gods were behind the creation of the earth and the heavens. They lived in the stars and planets. Spirits inhabited the elements, and to the Chaldeans, ghosts, phantoms, and daemons worked under the guises of illness and delusion. That the gods existed was as simple as confirming the sun existed, and where any aspect of nature could not be reduced to practical causes, the gods provided the next best solution to a mystery. Yes, a god must be at work. Depending on your definition of a god, this could be a superstitious or pragmatic idea. Somehow ancient peoples worshipped similar gods under similar pretenses, despite being separated by vast spans of sea and continent. Our question is not why this is the case at the moment, but what these gods represented. A question, as we are seeing, which cannot be answered with a closed end. If asked to give a clear definition of a god, the modern thinker is faced with a serious challenge, and often double-crossed by their biases. Unless we should wish to generalize around this challenge, we must admit we have not lived when these gods were so greatly worshipped. We can't digest their variations as they transformed within their native cultures. Flinders Petrie, a British archaeologist and Egyptologist responsible for countless discoveries in Egypt, expounds on the limits of modern theology in his book The Religion of Ancient Egypt. Quote, "Before dealing with the special varieties of the Egyptians' belief in gods, it is best to try to avoid a misunderstanding of their whole conception of the supernatural. The term God has come to tacitly imply to our minds such a highly specialized group of attributes that we can hardly throw our ideas back into the more remote conceptions to which we also attach the same name. It is unfortunate that every other word for supernatural intelligences has become debased, so that we cannot well speak of demons, devils, ghosts, or fairies without implying a noxious or a trifling meaning, quite unsuited to the ancient deities that were so beneficent and powerful. If then we use the word God for such conceptions, it must always be with the reservation that the word has now a very different meaning from what it had to ancient minds. Thus arises the need for evidence in which to ground our descriptions. Where any god is concerned, the realm of second-hand speculation already poses enough problems. There isn't a moment where we can say a sun god is merely a sun god and pretend as though we've understood anything about it. What then is a steadfast approach? The first step is simple. Consult the ancient literature and any other sources, archaeological or mythological, until we're fit to weigh in with a trusty anchor. Let's remember the mistake of thinking that to explain a thing means to understand it. The gods were a felt presence, forces transcending the intellect, yet able to be called upon with prayer or drop in however they please if the circumstance was favorable. The gods lived in emotions and manifested in collective activities, their authority often depending on the position they occupied in the divine succession. The ability of a worshipper to find favor with a particular god meant nothing short of life or death, fortune or failure. Regarding the prayers that Egyptians reserved for their gods, Petrie also says, "There is but little trace of negative prayer to avert evils or deprecate evil influences, but rather of positive prayer for concrete favors. If a god was positively satisfied by prayer or magical means, the forces they controlled were more available. One might entice the favor of Hermes to benefit in music, travel, trade, and discourse. Hermes was the herald among the gods, being the only Olympian with the power to take messages from Zeus to Hades and back again. To gain his fellowship in this case meant to practice the mastered crafts of the god, much as the herald of a Thracian or Macedonian king might have practiced the arts of Hermes, bringing messages to and from. It isn't hard to identify personalities around us and inside of ourselves that parallel the Greek pantheon. Our needs for justice, our witty tongues, and our warring anger are all present. Somewhere there is a narrative to supply us with lessons and explanations, showing us that we evoke different gods depending on our emotional responses. Would gaining a god's favor mean for the Greeks that some abstract entity, described to have spoken and lived in a physical body, now has a specific interest in their personal life? We have only to see by their own words that it would depend on the Greek. Fortunately, the gods were compelling enough to be wondered at from time to time, but leave it up to centuries of philosophers to attach meaning to each of the gods' activities, whether it belonged there or not. From some of the earliest literature in the Greek world, like the Homeric hymns, we find the gods attached to exact qualities of psychology. Quote, "She bare a son, Hermes, of many shifts, blandly cunning, a robber, a cattle rustler, a bringer of dreams, a watcher by night, a thief at the gates." Not only does Hermes typify many psychological traits, but the planet Mercury receives its name from the god, as the fourth day of the week was sacred to him among the Greeks and Romans. Keeping in mind that Mercury is the fastest of the planets and that Wednesday also serves as the middle day of the week, much like Hermes became the mediator between gods, we begin to unravel some of the clever thinking that underlies how a god is tethered to aspects of the natural world that imitate its personality, or in this case, tethered to a planet. Psuedo-Hyginus writes in his Astronomica, quote, "It remains for us to speak of the 5 stars, which many have called wandering, and which the Greeks call planeta. This 5th star is Mercurius, named Stilbon. It is small and bright. It is attributed to Mercurius because he first established the months and perceived the courses of the constellations." Of course, Psuedo-Hyginus is referring to Thoth, the Egyptian god, who has always been credited with establishing the months and the constellations, for the Greeks at least since the time of Herodotus. From this quote, we have an approach that does not admit the gods as planets, but rather that planets are named after the gods. But how can a god establish months and chart constellations if it is a disembodied, non-human entity? Indeed, many of the gods have been dependent on the same material world as the humans who ascribed them their names and natures. The Roman lawgiver Cicero, living 106 to 43 BC, who was himself initiated into the mystery cults of his day, seems to have had some trouble with the incessant allegorizing of the gods, identifying in them the traits of ourselves and pointing out many of their more absurd stories. He writes in his The Nature of the Gods, quote, "For they are either properties inherent in ourselves, for instance, intelligence, hope, faith, virtue, concord, or objects of our desire, for instance, honor, safety, victory. I see that they have value, and I am also aware that statues are dedicated to them. But why they should be held to possess divinity is a thing that I cannot understand without further enlightenment. Fortune has a very strong claim to be counted in this list, and nobody will dissociate fortune from inconstancy and haphazard action, which are certainly unworthy of a deity." Now that we've indulged in a wider discussion around the definitions of the gods, another approach to the distribution of divinities and the divine hierarchy comes from the aforementioned Neoplatonist Hierocles of Alexandria, writing in the 5th century AD, who is known for a little act of rebellion when he came to Constantinople and bumped heads with the Christians. The Neoplatonist Damascius recounts this story, saying, "He went to Byzantium and there knocked against those in power. Taken to court, he was beaten by the blows of men. Covered in blood, he soaked the palm of his hand and sprinkled the judge, saying, 'Cyclops, come, drink some wine since you have eaten human flesh.'" Hierocles' most complete surviving writing comes from a commentary on the golden verses of Pythagoras. Here, Hierocles presents the fixed divine hierarchy, much like Iamblichus. The classes are, simply put, immortal gods, daemons, and heroes, and men. However, Hierocles distinguishes the kind of primary deity that the soul returns to, falling more in concert with the idea of a demiurge and the god that operates at the level of the intellect, whereas Plotinus, writing before him, would have expressed that the soul returns to the ultimate one, the precosmic God of all things. But as it relates to the hierarchy, let's see how Hierocles defines the roles of these 3 classes of beings. For the gods, he says that considering they are always united with the supreme and first God, they are always of the same opinion and intention as he is. It is befitting of God to have created images of himself that are not capable of changing into a corrupted form like the souls of men. Their will is always aligned with God's. They never forget because they never needed to remember. Between the immortal gods and the souls of men is the secondary essence of divine beings. These comprise angels and daemons. Angels, from the Greek angelos, or messenger, are as much made of God and aligned to his cause as the immortal gods, except that they do not partake of the same level of unity as the gods and can be seen as the first breaking off independency, the first offshoots. Where gods maintain a unity of mind with the highest principle, angels and daemons act with a greater degree of independence, but do not descend so low as to be souls of man, who Hierocles names mortal gods. The souls of man are the third essence of being, unique because of their vertically oriented duality and their ability to fall out of sync with the gods and the knowledge of God, only to have the ability to harmonize again and, of course, die back into the complete divinity they may totally forget about during mortal life. Human souls are mortal gods because we retain the capacity to be an image of God, full of goodness and light, and connect with the angels and daemons who usher down the higher energies. If a soul of man stands out far enough in divine likeness, they become a hero. Turning past the Neoplatonic grades of rational beings, a brief look inside the Hebrew texts presents a similar dispensation of divinities. In God, the archangels, angels, and demons. We could introduce a sort of hero with the idea of a prophet or a foremost representational image of a god incarnated in the flesh. We read from Psalm 8, where we find another version of this distribution, quote, "What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You have made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor." In Hebrew Genesis, there is plenty of room to the idea that below the level of the supreme God was the plurality Elohim that assisted in the creative act. Although the scholarship differs about this, we don't have to look at the many Hebrew names reduced to the English God to find our hierarchy of entities involved in maintaining and fulfilling that God's will. For over a generation, biblical scholars have been pointing to the polytheistic Israelite religion, which later Jewish scribes reworked to reflect a monotheism that originally was not present. Of the archangels, they are sometimes said to be 1, 3, or 7, depending on the text you read. Michael appears to be the only confirmed archangel in the canonical Old Testament, and comes to Daniel in a mystical vision by the river Tigris after 3 weeks of mourning and a particular kind of fasting. The way Michael appears human-like but of greater power, and is also the recipient of prayers, rings no less true for earlier gods. The arch designation means chief, implying that the archangel leads the others. Eventually, in the books of Enoch, whose oldest parts in the Ethiopic text come out of Hellenistic Judaism as early as the 3rd century BC, we find the angels in consort with Simyaza, descending and teaching humans certain civilizing arts, in much the same way as the god Prometheus steals fire for mankind, or Thoth the Egyptian teaches his people astronomy and mathematics, or Hermes invents the lyre and the sport of wrestling. Quote, "And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and taught them about metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets, ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of precious stones, and all coloring and dyes. And there was great impiety. They turned away from God, and committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways." To sum up the levels of divinity we have covered, focusing on the Greek and Hebrew allusions, we have the one, universal and pre-cosmic God, to which all things are unified, whose energy lesser beings partake of in varying degrees of fullness. The secondary intelligences that stem from the one are, of course, the gods, angels, daemons, and then the souls, who can rise and fall to heroic or otherwise antagonistic levels, who can imitate the gods or turn away from them according to their beliefs and deeds. In all places, the gods shared a greater divine wholeness with the highest God, contributing to the divine hierarchy in a perfect symbiosis. This places mankind at the bottom, even though humans retain access to the gods and messengers during mortal life. They are subsumed back into the effulgence of the gods, in some cases becoming gods upon death, and fulfilling the holographic as above, so below Hermetic principle. What we can be sure of is that the perception of gods has never been the same for every civilization we find them in. What is certainly true, however, is that they were real to everyone who worshipped them, and that certain experiential methods, such as the mystery initiations, have existed since the dawn of history to allow candidates to directly confront the divine within themselves and forever be transformed. The myths of gods likely contain historical allusions, psychological allegories, and symbolic forms that human beings can use to engage with for a variety of ends. Therefore, what the gods are has meant very different things from time to time, taking on the meaning their worshippers have imbued them with. The initiates of the mysteries, being more philosophically oriented, have demonstrated their esoteric understanding, which proclaims the gods are real, gods are within, and that the many literal old wives' tales the poets sang of suggest hints of a greater meaning beneath the surface. With this, we should come away with a sense of the gods' complexity and irreducibility, not being satisfied with definitions that dismiss other valid interpretations that coexisted with the periods in which the gods were worshipped on a massive scale. So remember not to be the soul of Plato's Phaedrus who falls and falls to earth, materializing their every perspective about the gods, but rather rise to take part in the heavenly circuit and experience them yourself. Thank you for liking this video and subscribing to the channel. If you would like to support this work and help me provide more source-based essays, consider supporting American Esoteric through the Patreon link in the description below. Thank you.